Hey guys, Lucky here today, and I wanted to talk about dead games, or more specifically, the practice of assuming a game will be dead based on certain factors like initial hype and player population. My last video was about a game called 33 Immortals made by Thunder Lotus Games, and not only were the comments skeptical about the game's future or current popularity, but I've been told from a handful of others that the game is going to die, so what's the point of even playing it? And at the end of the day, people are entitled to their opinion and what they do with their money, but I wanted to delve deeper into how the game industry has conditioned us players to make sure they are not about to spend time and money on a game that will be delisted and shut down in a few months. As a PC player, there are a few habits that I know some of us have picked up when we want to see just how successful a game is on day one or 10 years down the road. So let's take a look at a few multiplayer Steam games and how one might predict their future success or even lack of. Let's start with Among Us. The game initially released on November 16th, 2018. If we go to steamdb.info and navigate the left-hand side for the charts link, we come to a graph that shows a player count over a period of time that can be adjusted. As you can see, the game was initially only played by less than 1,000 players till April 2020, where after it exploded in popularity mainly due to streamers playing it during the lockdowns. Did you really experience the pandemic if you never heard of Among Us? The game peaked in September of 2020 with 400,000 players, and now according to SteamDB, it roughly averages a little over or under 5,000 players on Steam to be specific. Did streamers save this game from dying and jettison the developers into stardom and forever employment? The next game didn't have an equally happy ending. Now we come to Evolve, a game made almost 9 years ago by Turtle Rock Studios. If you've never heard of Turtle Rock, then let me ask if you've ever heard of one of the most popular zombie games of all time, Left 4 Dead. That game was made by Valve, specifically Valve South, which is Turtle Rock's former name. These guys went on to make Left 4 Dead 2 and worked on early phases of Counter-Strike Go's development. Yeah, whatever. How does this all tie into Evolve? Well, so far these guys have made bangers, right? And Evolve was looking to be their next big, beefy banger. It was a 4v1, hunters versus monsters type of multiplayer game with an appropriate amount of hype. The game was having tournaments all throughout 2015. It had a slight population bump in September of 2015 with a free weekend access, and then dipped back to roughly 500 players, give or take, that regularly played the game, that is until July 6th, 2016, where Turtle Rock announced the game was transitioning to become free to play with a new title, Evolve Stage 2. Issues with the game included a fuckload of DLC that wasn't included in the season pass for some reason. Mind you, this was a buy-to-play game with optional DLC, and a few years before free-to-play games really paved the way as a successful business model for some, not all games. And the player population holds on decently up until December 2016, where the count drops below 1,000 again. I want you guys to notice the player count before and after September 2018, because that's exactly when publisher 2K Games decided to shut down the dedicated servers, which meant peer-to-peer LAN parties only after that. Gamers generally agree that multiplayer games die when this plug is pulled. Are you ready for the lightning round? We had games like Lawbreakers shut down a little after a year due to poor sales. Hawken, which came out as a promising mech game with an arena-style shooter that has now been morphed into a weird open-world co-op title by its publisher, 505 Games. Tribes Ascend, a game developed by the notorious Hi-Res Studios. It was one of a handful of titles that they pretty much have abandoned so far. I could do a video alone on the multitude of games that they stopped supporting in favor of Smite. Killer Queen Black is a game that debuted with a 258 peak player count during the month of its release. I like this game a lot on Nintendo Switch and really wish I bought a Steam key before they shut it down and delisted it on November 30th, 2022. However, the reason for their shutdown, according to Google, was interesting since most games with microtransactions shut down due to not enough revenue. KQB couldn't even implement microtransactions. The CEO of Liquidbit, whom developed the game, was honest and admitted they just couldn't handle the game as an indie developer.
We f***ed up.
The next game could possibly be one of the most overhyped games of all time on Steam. Payday 3 debuted to a whopping 77,000 players during its first week. Now it averages about 500 players, give or take. What happened? According to Google, Payday 3 servers shit the bed the first few days, and since it's a live service, nobody could play the game. It's actually hilarious how much more successful Payday 2 continues to be over Payday 3. And to me, this is just a classic case of greed because they could have allowed offline play in Payday 3, but it always comes down to money and deterring things like pirating or modding while maximizing microtransaction revenue. Let's talk about the interesting anomaly that is Deadlock. Valve's next big multiplayer game is going to be a 6v6 MOBA, but instead of a top-down camera and QWER controls, they have decided to make the game in the style of a third-person shooter where each mystic has at least 4 abilities, and the fourth one is an ultimate ability similar to MOBA games. Up until August 23rd of 2024, the game was very hush-hush, and players with access to the game were encouraged to invite friends, but not leak a shred of information. After Valve put up the Steam page for Deadlock, the unofficial NDA was officially lifted. Why do I refer to this game as an anomaly? Because after the restrictions were somewhat lifted, its peak player count was hit on September 2nd for 171,000 players, and now it currently averages about 10,000 players regularly. For a game that hasn't really been released in any shape or form, keep in mind it's just in testing right now, it's putting up some insane numbers, and it's currently the second most wishlisted game on Steam, according to SteamDB. While it might be easy to predict success in the game's future because it's a Valve game, there was no way anyone could have predicted a game to be this successful in the playtesting phase alone. I wanted to make sure and conclude with a couple games that I hope end up succeeding. Supervive is a top-down brawler battle royale that is somewhat of a successor to games like Battlerite and Bloodline Champions. It debuted on Steam in early access November 20th, 2024, with a 30,000 player count, which is impressive for an underhyped indie game. It went on to peak at 47,000 players 4 days later. From there, the player population declined till about January 2025, where it holds on to a steady 2K players during peak times. What went wrong? I would say nothing went wrong. It's just the game appeals to a very niche audience that love those top-down brawlers I previously listed. So this game draws a lot of MOBA players because the skill translation is almost one-to-one, but then you have issues like lethality, as the devs describe it, where the time to kill is so fast and coordinated squads will stomp newer solo players quite easily.
While lethality is a big part of what makes Supervive work, it makes it hard to appreciate the combat depth if you're dying too fast.
They are attempting to mitigate this issue by getting rid of 4-man squad and duo queues and making trios the new default. Hopefully this tackles queue times due to lower player population and the lethality pub stomp issues. A lot has already changed from the time Supervive held closed beta tests till now. And while it does have an in-game shop with microtransaction skin emotes, it's not something the devs are focusing on, and they've recently decided to change the store by getting rid of the FOMO rotation strategy and setting it to just display all cosmetics for sale at one time. If you're getting bored of League or Apex Legends, then I honestly recommend this game since some of the devs have previous experience with those titles. Another game that's fresh off the block but not necessarily indie due to their publisher is going to be Fragpunk, debuting with 11,000 players on release with a peak player count of nearly 114,000 players just 3 days later. Bad Guitar Studio held no punches, well, except for delaying the console version of the game. Whoops. But aside from that, the game does a very decent job of competing with tac shooter staples like CS2 and Valorant. Why? Because it doesn't take itself too seriously. The gimmick is the option to choose amongst 3 cards each round and change the rules of the game. Cards that give your enemies giant heads for the upcoming round to make them easier to headshot, or cards that make the round knife fights only. There's a card where defenders can eliminate one of the 2 sites and force attackers to push from a predictable flank. Currently, Fragpunk is averaging around 20,000 players each 24-hour cycle. Is the game destined to die? As long as the developers keep updating it and listening to player feedback, I don't see why this game can't carve out its own path and really reward current and future fans with a good time. At the end of the day, players want their time and money to be well spent on games, and developers should strive to make those kinds of games. But using graphs off SteamDB or going off of hype to assess whether a game will succeed or not can surprise you. My name is Lucky, and if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much. Please consider liking and subscribing, and why not drop a comment about the game that you are currently loving or maybe missing. Good luck out there.